Now, what I have for you today is a video that I've wanted to make for quite a while, and I'm finally getting around to it, and that is picking my top 10 favorite WWE World Heavyweight Championship reigns of all time. You know, the WWE Championship as we know it today has been referred to by several other names. The Undisputed WWE title, it's been the WWF World Heavyweight Championship, it has been the WWF Heavyweight Championship, but that title and the long lineage of that title is arguably the most prestigious title in the history of wrestling, definitely the most prestigious in the history of the WWE, the largest wrestling company in the world. So I'm paying tribute to the championship and the lineage of that championship by picking out my top 10 favorite WWE Championship reigns here for you today. Now, before I get started, there's a few caveats that I want to point out before you guys see my list and ultimately want to rip my head off for some of my picks. But number one, this will only be covering the WWE Championship and the lineage of that title going all the way back to the Bruno San Martino days. It's not going to count the World Heavyweight title when the big gold belt was around. It's not going to count the Universal title or any other World Championship that has floated around in WWE. The WCW title was there for a while, though the Undisputed title will count since that was the WWF title and the WCW title merged into one championship. But it's only going to be counting the championship lineage recognized as we know the WWE Championship as we know it today. Number two, there is no other metric for making a selection on this list outside of my own personal enjoyment. Ratings don't matter, box office doesn't matter, pay-per-view buy rates don't matter, none of that stuff matters. This is only purely my personal enjoyment of the championship reign that will get onto this list, or is the main determining factor for getting onto this list. So you can squabble about so-and-so is a bigger draw than so-and-so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I personally enjoyed the reign as much. So this is only my personal enjoyment. As a fan, what did I enjoy the most? And that was really the whole point of me doing this video, was to point out which championship reigns that I liked and which ones that I personally enjoyed. And finally, there is one reign that I have decided to leave off this list and did not consider it for the top 10, and that is the current one going on right now, the reign of one Roman Reigns, who is the current unified champion holding both the Universal and the WWE Heavyweight Championship, which he will defend at WrestleMania. Now, the reason I'm not counting this reign is technically it has not ended yet. It might end at WrestleMania, but because it hasn't ended yet, I don't feel like I can appropriately judge the reign as a full package just yet. I've got to wait until it's done before ultimately deciding whether or not it's worthy of a top 10. Although if it has a grand finale, I think Roman's reign would easily make it onto this list. So whatever the number 10 is on this list, just when Roman ultimately loses the belt and the end of the reign is satisfactory, just bump number 10 off this list and put Roman Reigns on there somewhere, because his reign has been stellar. Let's go ahead and get started. Number 10, John Bradshaw Layfield, 2004 to 2005. Let me explain. Okay, I know that JBL's reign is not considered a great one by many people, but for me it was, and the main reason is, when you look at SmackDown at that point in time, Angle got hurt, Big Show got hurt, Lesnar was gone. They didn't have a lot of great heels, so they decided to just take a gamble on a perennial low-card guy in Bradshaw, or a tag team guy in Bradshaw, completely reinvent him and push him as an old-school mega heel. And I thought it worked. When you look at the matches he had with Eddie Guerrero, I thought he was able to get a lot of heat in the match. The first match they had ultimately worked very well, and ultimately led to JBL becoming the WWE Champion at the Great American Bash during the Bull Rope match. And what happened after that was a good long-term heel reign where I thought JBL was consistently entertaining and was the combination of both a brutish bully and a sniveling coward who would always find some way to weasel out with the championship. Because you look at all the competition he had, Eddie Guerrero, Booker T, The Undertaker, guys like that, Rey Mysterio. It felt like any one of those guys could have beaten him. Big Show, Kurt Angle eventually when they came back. Any one of those guys could have beaten him, but they couldn't beat his stable. They couldn't beat all the tricks and the traps that he had to weasel out of every single match that he was a part of. I mean, go back and watch the steel cage match he had with Big Show. That was one of the best finishes I think I've ever seen as far as keeping heat on a heel and getting him to WrestleMania. I thought all of that stuff was great, and I thought Bradshaw himself played the character to the absolute hilt and did a great job. My only knock on the title reign, honestly, is the way it ended, because I think the match between him and Cena at WrestleMania was sadly anticlimactic and was a bad end to JBL's reign and a less than stellar start to Cena's run at the top, but they kind of made up for it with the I Quit match that they had. But overall, I thought JBL's reign was very entertaining, especially if you like a good, long, old-school heel run. Number 9, CM Punk from 2011 to 2013. Now, if you look at the summer of Punk from 2011, that was the hottest thing that the WWE had going at the time, and then they kind of dropped the ball with it with a bad feud with Triple H and Kevin Nash and the Who Sent the Text angle. They kind of botched the entire thing, so it felt like Punk was kind of dead in the water at that point, and even when they put the WWE title on him, it felt like an apology more than the culmination of something special. But he took that reign, and he went on to be an excellent champion. Now, not initially, I want to point that out, not initially. He was kind of like mini Cena, and as far as being kind of a bland babyface, and he was playing second and third banana to so many other things. Like, you look at the WrestleMania 28 card, he's going in as the champion, and he's less important than the Hell in a Cell match or the Cena Rock match that had been built up for a year. There were pay-per-views where he's working with Daniel Bryan on pay-per-view and Johnny Ace and John Cena is main eventing the show. Things like that where it made CM Punk feel like a second banana champion, but it ultimately worked out because the longer he had the belt, he was able to eventually transition into being a strong heel champion, and being overlooked for as long as he was kind of fueled that fire, and it allowed CM Punk to become the best version of himself, especially with Paul Heyman as his mouthpiece. And I thought the stuff that he did during his extra long run was very, very good, especially the heel portion of it, working with the Shield and the feud with The Rock and all that stuff. Again, going as far as how the title reign ended, I would have liked for it to have ended at WrestleMania 29 while I was there. Would have been great to be there in person to see CM Punk's title reign come to an end. I wish they had saved it for that. But in any case, I thought Punk did an excellent job as champion, and it was the reign that he was always capable of having.
Number 8, Bruno San Martino, 1963 to 1971 and 1973 to 1977. Now, Bruno is a weird case because he was the champion long before I was born, so I didn't live through the Bruno era. And it's also the main reason why I'm including both of his major runs as champion in this list, because they all kind of lump together for me because, again, I didn't experience it in real time. This is just stuff that I've come to appreciate as I found more and more footage of Bruno while he was the champion. Now, some people might say that I'm disrespecting Bruno by putting him too low on the list, but I'm putting him at number 8 because I didn't live through the reign. So I didn't, he wasn't my guy. He was my dad's guy. My dad was the one who told me all about Bruno and raved about him. So to me, he was kind of like the Babe Ruth of wrestling. He was this legendary, iconic figure, almost of like Greek mythology level proportions. And I wanted to see more of him. So anytime I could find Bruno footage, it was always an exciting accomplishment for me because this, keep in mind, this is before the age of the internet, and this footage, there isn't a whole lot of Bruno footage out there that's readily available for us fans to check out. But that also makes Bruno kind of this interesting relic of the past, especially for my generation, where every time I find a Bruno match or a Bruno segment or something, it almost feels like I'm Indiana Jones in the temple grabbing the idol. Like I found something truly precious and truly special because Bruno was a star, and Bruno was the guy that, as far as wrestling is concerned, made Madison Square Garden like one of the premier wrestling venues. He's in the Madison Square Garden Hall of Fame for good reason. He was one of the top attractions. And the fact that he held the title for as long as he did for so many years on 2 different occasions, by far, two of the longest runs as World Heavyweight Champion in the New York territory, WWF, WWE, whatever you want to call it. He is one of the most legendary icons in the history of that company and deserves all the credit that he gets. Now, on the flip side, some people might think that it's weird for me to put Bruno on this list because, this is before the WrestleMania era. This is before sports entertainment or the WWE as we know it today. So why am I putting kind of this relic of the past on this list? Well, I'm all about respecting the past. And I think history is important. You have to know where you came from. And there is no figure that better defines what the classic New York territory was all about than Bruno San Martino. When you look at his feuds with Stan Hansen and his feuds with superstar Billy Graham and the matches he had. I mean, one of the matches I would love to see is the 65-minute draw that he had with Pedro Morales. I think that would be one for the ages to check out. I would love to see... I've never seen his matches with Gorilla Monsoon. That's something I would love to check out. He worked with Greg Valentine, another great example. There's just so much cool stuff out there that anytime I can get my hands on it in regards to Bruno, that just makes it all the more exciting. And I got to imagine when he lost the title the first time to Ivan Koloff, that must have been like the 1970s equivalent of the Undertaker's streak ending. It was surely a shocking moment, but for what he meant to the company and what he meant to this business as a whole, Bruno San Martino absolutely deserves to be on this list. Number 7, Triple H, 2000. Now, there aren't a whole lot of Attitude Era championship reigns on this list because, I mean, the belt changed hands so frequently during the Attitude Era that it's, you know, a lot of guys didn't get substantial reigns at that point in time. 1999 in particular, it was just kind of ridiculous between the hot potatoing between Rock and Mankind and then Austin and Undertaker, and then in 2000 even we got Rock and Triple H kind of ping-ponging the belt back and forth to each other. But we did get a somewhat lengthy reign from January of 2000 to April of 2000, and that was Triple H's run, carrying him as the top heel into WrestleMania and even beyond. And, you know, 4 months or so, that back in those days, during the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars period, that was an eternity being champion for that length of time. So I will definitely give credit to it. And Triple H, for all the negativity that gets thrown his way, I myself have been guilty of it. In 2000, he was untouchable. Like, he was the MVP of the WWF in terms of being that strong heel character to kind of guide all of the storylines. And, you know, you look at the top stars in the company, The Rock wouldn't have looked as good as he did if he wasn't working with somebody as good as Triple H. And you look at that feud he had with Cactus Jack Mick Foley, where he ultimately retired him. That was some amazing stuff. And this was where Triple H really came into his own as a main event player and as a heel persona, helped out in large part due to the storyline where he married Stephanie McMahon and they kind of ruled the show together. It gave the WrestleMania season that strong heel that it needed and all the heat it needed heading into WrestleMania. I have my misgivings with how WrestleMania 2000 was ultimately handled, but he came out of that WrestleMania as the first ever heel champion to walk out with the belt, only for him to drop it the next month at Backlash in a terrific match with The Rock. But during that time, Triple H was the guy, and he was the champion. And of all the reigns that he had, and he had many of them, this one, for me, was his best. I mean, this was peak Triple H, and you know, all the talk about him being the game and being that damn good, it was definitely true at this point in time. Number 6, the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, 1997 to 1998. Now, I think when most people think of Shawn Michaels as being World Heavyweight Champion, they think of his run from 1996, because the boyhood dream came true, he won the belt at WrestleMania, and he had a nice, lengthy run as champion to carry him through most of the year. But when I think of Shawn Michaels as World Heavyweight Champion, I think of D-Generation X, prick, jerkweed Shawn Michaels, who won the belt in the Montreal Screwjob, one of the most legendary title changes of all time, you know, for right or wrong reasons. It is one of the most historic moments in WWE history, and he came out of that situation with the belt. And being the degenerate jerk that he was, with DX at his side, Triple H in China, this guy was a perfect heel champion and the perfect heel to be toppled by Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. Now, the amount of heat and the hateability of Shawn Michaels during this era, especially when you look at his matches with Undertaker. They'd had the Hell in a Cell match the month before he became the champion, but their casket match had some of that same vibe to it, where you just wanted to see that swarmy, I keep using the word degenerate, but it just fits perfectly with him, that degenerate little jerk get his comeuppance, and they made you wait for it and wait for it and wait for it. It was fun to watch Shawn Michaels get beat up, is basically my point. And you know, as a heel on the mic, he took it to the nth degree and was just all about being as as much of a jerk as he possibly could be. Shawn was absolutely perfect in this role and one of the greatest heels of all time for my money. So, and it all came to a head at WrestleMania 14 where, thanks to some interference from Mike Tyson, Stone Cold Steve Austin walked out with the belt. So it was an amazing start to Stone Cold Steve Austin's run and a perfect end to Shawn Michaels because the heel got toppled. So Shawn during this era, he was absolutely fantastic.
Number 5, Brock Lesnar, 2014 to 2015. Man, I gotta tell you, when Lesnar came back to the WWE in 2012 and he lost his first match to John Cena and he split matches with Triple H, losing to him at WrestleMania, which has the most eyeballs on it, I thought they'd kind of screwed up Brock at that point. I was like, it's just kind of like whatever, they ruined him. And then he goes into WrestleMania 30 in this match with Undertaker where I was like, Taker's gonna beat him, whatever. And then he ended the streak, and I was like, okay, I mean, that's shocking and everything, but he's just going to lose to Cena at SummerSlam, so whatever. And then he goes into SummerSlam with the WWE Championship on the line and utterly destroys John Cena, suplexing him to holy hell and then F5ing him into oblivion to win the title. And once that happened, you had the guy who ended the streak, and you had the guy that absolutely demolished John Cena to win the title. By that point, Lesnar went from a failed experiment to the most unbeatable guy in wrestling, and it created a mystique around his matches that nobody else had. Every match felt like a big deal. Every match felt like it had a big fight feel, and every match also felt like it could end at any second because Brock could just demolish people that quickly. When you look at his matches with Cena, his matches with Seth Rollins, and how those things came out, the fans were reacting to those matches like you felt like they could end at any second, and that's the type of mystique that Brock Lesnar brought to the company at this time when he was champion. And the fact that he didn't work every single pay-per-view made those title matches even more special. And what made it even more enjoyable was that he never really lost that title. It was very interesting how they did that. They used the Money in the Bank cash-in at WrestleMania to kind of get the belt off of him, turning the match into a triple threat. But yeah, when you look at just the sheer badassery that Lesnar was able to convey, and the birth of Suplex City, bitch, and all that other stuff, Lesnar was just this perfect animal-like final boss that nobody could beat. The only way you could get the belt off of him is you did something fluky like a Money in the Bank cash-in. That's how it felt at the time. And as a character, I don't think Lesnar's ever been more exciting than he was during this point. He was absolutely amazing. Number 4, Macho Man Randy Savage, 1988 to 1989. Now, this reign is interesting because Savage only defended the title on pay-per-view once, and that was against Hogan at WrestleMania 5 when he lost the belt. But when you look at all the storylines that went into the Macho Man Randy Savage title reign, it was one of the greatest things they ever created, where you had the Mega Powers joining forces, then you did the thing at the main event where Andre and DiBiase screwed Hogan out of the title, then they did the tournament where Hogan helped Savage win the belt, and that big celebration, which is one of the most, to me, it's still one of the most satisfying title wins ever, because Savage is my boy and I love him. But and then Savage kind of had to carry the ball in Hogan's absence, and I thought he did really, really well, defending the title against Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase and Bad News Brown and things like that. But when it came to pay-per-views, he was always linked with Hogan. When you look at SummerSlam 88 and you look at Survivor Series 88, he was linked with Hogan, and over that time, building resentment towards Hogan and jealousy over Hogan's success and fury over the perception that Hogan was trying to steal his girl, all of that fed into the crazy side of Macho Man, and would almost came to a head at the Royal Rumble match where Hogan eliminated him and they almost had a blow up there, but it really came to a head on the second main event where Savage turned heel on Hogan, walked out on his partner, and the Mega Powers exploded. One of the greatest segments that the WWE has ever done. And it all culminated with the match at WrestleMania 5 where Hogan won the belt back. But by that point, you'd gotten so much story and so much excitement and so much character development out of Randy, going from heel to babyface, joined up with Hogan, and then right back to heel, and even better heel than he was before. It was really indicative of just how great Savage really was as a talent and an on-screen performer. And for me personally, it's one of the most enjoyable championship reigns of all time, even though like I said, he never defended the title on pay-per-view except for the WrestleMania match with Hogan. And if you look at it, you look at all the creative that went into that storyline, which I say, the rise and fall of the Mega Powers, arguable case for greatest storyline in WWF history. They got 2 WrestleManias out of that storyline. That's how good it was. And it felt natural. It wasn't like they did the match at 4 and then did nothing for a year, and then February rolled around. It's like, all right, here we go. We're doing the rematch. It was nothing like that. They actually had a week-to-week evolving storyline involving Hogan and Savage, and it ultimately culminated with a very exciting WWF Heavyweight Championship match. I'll be honest, as far as the 80s goes, it's probably my favorite WWF title match from the 80s WrestleManias. And it's like, is there a WrestleMania main event more 80s than that? Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage? I don't know. But I think that's probably the one knock that people could have on this reign, is that when you think of Savage as champion, you also think of Hogan. And, there's accusations that Hogan stole a spotlight and things like that, which I'm not going to dispute those. But as far as creating great television, great wrestling magic, I thought that this reign was stellar, and I absolutely loved it. So, way to go, Macho Man. Number 3, Bret the Hitman Hart, 1994. Now, the mid-90s were not a great time for the WWF. There was the steroid scandal, dwindling interest in the product, and, it felt like the company was headed south real quickly, especially when WCW started to get real hot, although 94 was still a few years removed from WCW reaching its peak. But at this point in 94, there were just like a handful of guys that I was attached to and made the show worth watching. One of them was Undertaker, one of them was Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, one of them was Shawn Michaels, but my favorite wrestler at that point in time was Bret the Hitman Hart, which is weird because I was a big Hulkamaniac, and Bret is almost the antithesis of Hogan, where he sells pure technical wrestling, and is more of a mild-mannered person rather than a larger-than-life superhero. But Bret was the ultimate underdog and played that role exceptionally well. Now, he was already champion prior to this, but when he won the title at WrestleMania 10 from Yokozuna on my birthday, that was a great night for me. I was very happy. And then when you look at the stuff that he did during that championship reign, the feud with his brother Owen Hart, again, one of the best storylines in company history. That excellent match he had with the 1-2-3 Kid on Raw, which people still say to this day is one of the greatest matches in Raw history. The feud with Bob Backlund, which was amazing. And it made Bob Backlund an interesting character by turning him heel and all that great stuff that they did. For me, when I think of Bret's run as champion, I think this is his best run, because it was just Bret Hart being the best Bret Hart that you could ever imagine. It was him being the greatest worker in the world. I still think there's a case to be made that Bret Hart is the greatest worker in the history of the business, as far as like all the little things that he would do in his matches to really make them matter, and the finishes that he would come up with for all of his matches. I'd be hard-pressed to find a better in-ring worker than Bret Hart, but the high quality of material that he produced during that time kept me invested in the WWF product, which, WCW, like I said, was gaining steam at that point. They'd gotten Hogan, and, I was a big fan of Sting and Vader and guys like that. So Bret was one of the guys that kept me on board, and his run as champion was fantastic, and I will never forget it. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin, 1998. Now, I am kind of cheating with this one because I'm counting both of Austin's reigns in 1998 as part of this. Considering there's only one day between the two reigns, I think it's safe to say that I can pretty much count the entire thing as one collective reign. But Stone Cold Steve Austin, the icon of the Attitude Era, one of the greatest characters, world champions, and main event talents of all time, and one of the greatest stars that wrestling has ever produced. And he was really, and I know some talents say this and it's overblown, but Austin really was the voice of a generation. That rebellious, in your face, smash mouth, screw you, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do attitude that the late 90s embodied. Stone Cold Steve Austin just fit that mold perfectly. And I've already talked about with Triple H's run how the Attitude Era produced some of the greatest week-to-week television in company history, and that's indisputable. When you look at, go back and watch Raw from 98 to about 2001, and that's like some of the best wrestling television of all time. Especially the fact that they could keep that up week to week is amazing. I will put a magnifying glass on Stone Cold Steve Austin's reign here. His time as champion in 1998, greatest week-to-week television in company history, arguably wrestling history. The feud he had with Vince McMahon made for some of the most compelling and exciting television you will ever see in the art form of professional wrestling or outside of the art form of professional wrestling. It just felt like it kept getting crazier and crazier and crazier, and when you think it couldn't get any crazier, they would find some way to top it. Whether it be him pouring cement into his Corvette, or the Zamboni incident, which I said in a video years ago was my favorite episode of Raw of all time. There was the segment where Austin had Vince arrested. Vince had Austin arrested several times. There was the fake match that they had where they announced Austin and Vince at the start of the show, and everybody flocked to the TV screens and actually beat Nitro in the ratings for the first time in 83 weeks to watch that match. It was Austin's run at the top was just unbelievably exciting. And when you look at all the other stuff he was doing, like the feud with Foley and the feud with Undertaker, and his early stuff with Rock. And honestly, the television was so good, it was good even after Austin was no longer the champion, because then he got to go on the road to redemption and try to get the title back heading into WrestleMania 15, and all that stuff was great. So, Stone Cold Steve Austin is an icon for a reason. He's one of the greatest wrestlers and world champions of all time for a reason. There's very few personas that have captured the audience's imagination the way that Stone Cold Steve Austin did. I think that's the best way to put it. He truly was one of a kind. And number one, Hulk Hogan, 1984 to 1988. Now, Hogan's first reign to me, it was like, especially as a kid, it was like the gold standard of the WWF Heavyweight Championship. Now, I was alive because I was born in 85, so I was more around for Hogan's second and third reigns. And the second reign, while exciting, and they did some really good stuff with it, that was more like typical standard formula Hogan. But his first reign was a lot more exciting because of the nature of the business at that point. It was uncharted territory where Vince McMahon was trying to go national and basically destroy the territory system. And at the front was this blonde Superman in real life, Hulk Hogan, that he used as his mega champion to expand the brand all across the country and make deals like the Rock and Wrestling Connection and bring Cyndi Lauper on board and bring Mr. T on board and all of these things that they did. Hulk Hogan was the golden boy that was at the forefront and helped make a lot of those things happen. And so wrestling was in a lot of flux at that point, and there were a lot of gambles being taken. And because of that, I think the product was more exciting because they were able to take more risks and do more things. And Hogan was allowed to be, he was still trying to figure it out. He didn't have it down to the Hulk Hogan match wasn't down to a perfect science yet. So a lot of Hogan's matches during this run were like bloodbaths. When you look at his stuff with Dr. D and Iron Sheik and, outside of the match where he won the title, it felt like Hogan bled. Like, it was almost like he inspired Jon Moxley, because it felt like Hogan bled in every other match he was in. And the tag matches with Andre as his partner was set the stage for things later on. But those early days of the Rock and Wrestling Connection, very exciting time. And you look at things that they were able to do, like the first WrestleMania, like the War to Settle the Score with Roddy Piper. I mean, some of these are the biggest shows in wrestling history, and WrestleMania became the biggest show, the biggest annual show in wrestling, with Hulk Hogan on top. And then you look at other things that came about. Survivor Series came around while Hogan was on top. Wrestling on pay-per-view came around while Hogan was on top. And because they had Hogan, they were also able to elevate other personas, other characters, like Macho Man Randy Savage came around at this point. Ted DiBiase came around towards the end of the reign. Roddy Piper was able to become one of the best heels in wrestling. He was like this, Hogan was like this lightning rod that everyone else kind of fed off of, and were able to make great runs and careers for themselves, even if they didn't get the belts. And I'm one of the guys, I maintain that Piper should have gotten a run with the belt, but that's just me. But Hogan, holding that belt for over 4 years, it yielded some of the greatest material in wrestling history. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention his falling out and feud with Andre the Giant, which resulted in what is arguably, to this day, the biggest match in wrestling history, his big title match against Andre at WrestleMania 3, which was so huge, they were able to build anticipation for a rematch, and that's how they got Survivor Series, and that's how we got the rematch at the main event, which 33 million people watched, a number that sounds made up, to be honest, that many people stayed home to watch wrestling, but it's crazy success, and it resulted in one of my personal favorite title changes of all time, where DiBiase and Andre screwed Hogan out of the belt with the double referees. The Hebners are involved, and it set the stage for, I mean, you look at that angle, they basically got two, like I said, they got 2 WrestleManias out of it, between 4 and 5, and everybody involved got elevated. So, yeah, even the end of Hogan's reign was very exciting, and to me, it's, you know, Hogan on top from 84 to 88, that to me is still kind of the gold standard of WWF title reigns. Yes, Austin had a great run, and yes, there have been long runs that have happened since then, like CM Punk, like John Cena, like Roman's current reign, but none of them quite have the same magic and intrigue to it that Hulk Hogan's first reign does. And I think a lot of it is because, you know, Hogan getting the belt after 88 was kind of like the safe bet. Yeah, go with Hogan. He's the safe bet. But before that, it really wasn't. He was kind of like uncharted. Like I said, it was uncharted territories. And you look at the massive success of that run, and it shows, man, Vern Gagne really dropped the ball not putting the AWA title on this guy. But Hulk Hogan, you know, he was more than just a wrestling champion. He was more than just a superhero to a lot of people. He was a true pop culture icon, and that happened during this run. So for me, greatest WWE, WWF, WWF, whatever name you want to call it, the greatest run of the company's greatest championship was Hogan's first run from 84 to 88, and that's my pick.